Good afternoon to you. Mark South, HurricaneTrack.com here, Monday, November the 6th now, 2023. For today's update, yes, we are going to do it. We're going to take a way too early look at the 2024 Atlantic hurricane season. Why, you may be asking? Because the information is out there. Some of these climate models already projecting what they are, quote-unquote, thinking for next year. So I figured, let's talk about it. Let's talk about it in a context that hopefully A, you can understand, and B, maybe more importantly, follow along with me over the coming months to see if these climate signals change, stay the same, or improve, and in other words, look more robust for next year's hurricane season. Because what I'm going to show you is already eye-opening enough, and there's a tweet or two about it already out there that's just like, wow. And look, I know we're still in the 2023 hurricane season, and in fact, we will start out at that very location in 2023. Luckily, for the first time since I think it's about June the 5th, nothing out there in the Atlantic or the Eastern Pacific to be concerned with. However, we still need to watch this area of the Caribbean. The GFS just doesn't want to let go of trying to develop something down there, and there are a few pieces of energy. This is one of them right here. You've got these areas of vorticity that come off the mountains of Colombia. We'll get to this in just a little bit on the GFS itself. But otherwise, strong upper-level winds cutting across much of the tropics and subtropics, as you can see through here. I mean, it's November. We're not normally supposed to see much activity, and for now, that certainly is the case. We're not seeing much activity. However, the GFS does like to do its little thing there of developing energy down here in the Western Caribbean, taking something either coming in from the east, maybe a tropical wave or pieces of a tropical wave, sometimes vorticity that comes off these mountains down here of South America, and lo and behold, you get something that tries to develop. That's what it was trying to show with 97L. The atmosphere was there, but the conditions were allowing, but for whatever reason down at the surface, nothing got going too significantly. But as you can see here, after we get out to about a week, and yes, that's just too far out in time to be reliable, we all know this, but the pattern is very interesting. The GFS strengthening the high over the southeast, and got a big high pressure up here. It's going to be very nice over the southeast, a little bit too dry. We need some rain here. And then down below, as we call it, you get low pressure developing. Why? Because you get convergence down here in a pattern like this. So again, let's bring me back on so I talk to you, not just at you. The pattern should favor something trying to develop. The pattern will be there. Will something develop is the big question. And so we can see roughly at the surface, 5,000 feet, almost the surface, right? Pretty decent pattern, high pressure up in the north over the southeast U.S., and then you get low pressure developing down in the Caribbean. And if you look at the upper levels, 200 millibars, very favorable conditions overall. And again, it's just going to be a matter, does something come along, whether it is this energy that comes off of South America. If we back it up, you can kind of see that happening. These little pieces of energy that come off these mountains down here that get embedded in the trades, every once in a while, that can slow down through here. The air converges or piles up. You get your showers and thunderstorms, your lowering of pressures, and off you go. And this is 156 hours out. So just a little bit more than 6 days, and you start to see this broad turning overall down here. So it's worth watching, certainly. Am I too concerned at all about it? No, not yet, because it is far enough into the future that the GFS just might be running away with something again that's not going to be there. But we won't ignore it, because it is still the 2023 hurricane season. So there you go. Now, as we transition over into talking about next year, let's take a look at where we are now and the big puzzle piece, in my opinion, that we really need to watch going into next year. We know we've got this El Niño sitting out here, this very significant El Niño, and the 3.4 area roughly through here is at 1.8 Celsius above the long-term average. And that's pretty darn robust. That's a pretty significant El Niño. On the flip side, the Atlantic, as you well know, also warmer than average to a significant degree, pun intended. The Atlantic overwhelmed the El Niño, not allowing the El Niño to just chop down the hurricane season, and we ended up with an ace of close to 150 points. The energy that was output, we had a few quality storms, Category 5 Lee, down just east of the Caribbean back in September. That's not supposed to happen during an El Niño, right? And we had Idalia, that was a pretty big impact event for parts of Florida. And then most of the rest of the energy, of course, stayed well to the east of the United States. So we got lucky on that regard. And the El Niño really helped to keep things down from where they could have been had that El Niño not been there. Now remember that. If the El Niño hadn't been there this year, we probably would have had way more activity, and the steering pattern could have been different. We don't know. And we might have had more impacts here for land areas, including the islands. We don't know. But certainly not having the El Niño, I think we would have had, close to 250 ace points. Remember that, all right? So now, as we get into it, I want you to start committing this to memory right here. Okay, this is like Professor Mark talking to you. CANSIPS. What is that? That's the Canadian Seasonal to Interannual Prediction System, and we're at version 2. All right? But just remember the CANSIPS. All right, every month, it, along with other models, the CFS, I think, might even be daily, but the Euro, the ECMWF, comes out with monthly guidance on a global scale. Sea surface temperatures, pressure patterns, temperature patterns, all kinds of long-term, large-scale predictors for the globe. One of those is the CANSIPS, all right? From our good friends up north, from Canada, Environment Canada, right? So remember this. This is all that I'm going to show you is coming from the CANSIPS. So if we go over here and we look at Storm2k, one of our good friends and partners, been with them since 03 myself, they're already talking about it. I thought, this would be a good idea to discuss in my update today. And then we can, as I said in the opening, the monologue, if you will, we'll continue to look at this in the weeks to come. Now, here's the first graphic that should catch our attention. That is from the CANSIPS. All right? What does this show? We're going to get to this in just a minute. Then, people are talking about all kinds of things. I'll put the link to this thread on today's discussion so you can see what's happening. This is another one. This is our friend Adrian down in southeast Florida. Very adept at keeping an eye on what's happening in the tropics. Most of the people at Storm2k are. Now, this is a very interesting map as well. So now we go over to Twitter. It started getting picked up, and yes, I know it's called something else, but my mantra is it'll always be Twitter to me. So Andy mentioned this is just a few days ago. This was Friday. He's like, LOL, if that sea surface temperature look still shows up by late spring, we're going to get climate models and statistical models dropping 300 ACE forecasts. Why? What about this grabs the attention of somebody like Andy? Well, let's take a look. What are we looking at? Again, this is from the CANSIPS. This was initialized on the 1st of November, and this is the anomaly, the departure from something. And in this case, it is a temperature departure. And what do you notice? All right? And I know it's obvious, but before we go into that, answering that rhetorical question, let's go back over to this real quick. There's this. It's not quite the same scale, obviously. But what's missing? What changed? That did. We go from this being 1.8 Celsius above average now to looks like about a half to a degree, maybe a degree and a half, almost a complete reversal to La Niña. So that's the key. We go from El Niño to La Niña when? By next August, September, and October, which just happens to be the peak of the Atlantic hurricane season. And the CANSIPS is forecasting a very warm Atlantic basin. In fact, most of the highest heat content, and these are anomalies, mind you, are where? In the southwest part of the Atlantic basin, centered near the islands, the Greater Antilles. And the CANSIPS is also predicting a colder than average far North Atlantic. Why does that matter? Because it's not all distorted north to south. your heat content is focused right in the middle where your upward motion and all of your activity and your energy and everything can be maximized with a reduction in wind shear because the El Niño is gone. Now, we don't have hours and hours to sit here and use ChatGPT and Google and everything else and try to get a good track record history of how good the CANSIPS is. But we can look back and say, what do most of the models, if you look at the CANSIPS, the CFS, and the Euro, you combine all those, and even the UK Met, they also have, from the UK Met office over in England, they also do seasonal forecasting. On these large-scale patterns, the models are getting better. And you can look that up yourself in your own free time. The details, don't worry about those. It's the same thing as saying such and such sports team should have a really good team next year and have a winning season. The little details, maybe there's a game that they just didn't show up and they got blown out. Whatever. Those are details. But the overall picture is, barring any injuries or weird coaching changes, said team, stacked and loaded, should have a very good season. Sports and weather are very similar in statistical probability and so forth and so on. I'm serious, you know? And even though they're obviously completely different sciences, they do rely on one common denominator, and that would be statistics and correlation. And the models have gotten much better at these kinds of signals. And then we can look back at history. When we leave an El Niño, typically the Atlantic warms for various reasons. There's more to this than just, here's a map, let's see what happens. This gets updated every month. We'll see what it says in early December. We will revisit this. We'll look and see what the Euro seasonal is saying, and the CFS, and so forth. So there's that one that Andy was talking about. And then Adrian over here, he's got the crazy eyes right there, right? Yeah, that's definitely, you see a pattern like that, and that definitely looks like an active pattern for hurricane season. And Andy's right. The models, like the ECMWF, that does a seasonal tropical cyclone output with numbers, would probably show up with a 300 ACE forecast seeing that type of setup. And then it's up to the humans, like Dr. Klotzbach and others, to decipher it and make sense out of it, and don't just run away with something that crazy. I remember in 2022, the Euro was some like 230 ACE points or something. It was nuts. And look how that turned out. But anyway, now the precip. Again, this is very important. This is the Canadian model ensemble. It's a multi-model ensemble package. Is indicating, and I want you to understand what we're looking at here, precipitation anomalies. This is in millimeters. And if you look down here, blues in this case are not negative, they're positive. The positive anomalies are on the right-hand side of the legend down here, the scale, right? So look, from the coast of Africa all the way out into the main development region, over into the Caribbean, we have positive anomalies in excess of hundreds of millimeters above the long-term average. When is this valid for? Next July, August, September. Right into the heart of the hurricane season. The model, or models in this case, the output, is seeing something that says very big hurricane season possible for 2024. Now, what good does this do anybody to know this far in advance? For some, it could hopefully be an impetus to do something. Learn about hurricanes more. Maybe get flood insurance for the first time ever. Maybe you just move somewhere and you're like, I didn't really know much about hurricanes and this seems a little bit alarming. Turn that into motivation to do something. Act upon this information. Make the information actionable. Do something with it. Than just, oh, well, we're all doomed because there's going to be a big hurricane season. Yes, there are instances like what we have with Otis that there's just not much you can do. You got to basically hunker down and hope you survive the night. I'm serious. That comes along once in a while. We get those really severe situations, yes. But most of the time we can and do have warning, more than just 12 hours, and we can do at least something to better ourselves and better prepare ourselves mentally and fiscally, with an F, like monetarily, for what could happen. And I look at these as gifts. I've said this before too. Don't look at this as doom and gloom and doom casting or whatever. We know this far in advance that something might be coming next year that we can be ready for well in advance. I think that's a great thing. We don't have to sit here and go, well, we had no idea it was coming. All right. In the lower 48 department, and mind you, we will be switching to more and more of this kind of discussion every Monday. And if we have something big coming, a huge nor'easter, big lake effect event, some kind of a massive atmospheric river event along the west coast, or a winter storm / severe weather deal for the Great Plains and the Deep South, or whatever the case may be, yes, I'll be on more frequently. Otherwise, every Monday we'll take a look ahead at the week in weather. I figure that's a good title for this segment or whatever. The ending part of each of my Monday updates, we'll always do the tropics first, looking ahead after the current conditions kind of stuff into 2024, topics, and then we'll look at lower 48 weather, and we'll just call it a look ahead, into the next week's weather, something like that. Well, that's where we are. By the way, yes, it is too darn dry all down here as of late. So I myself, with my crunchy brown grass, have been looking for something to come along and give us a little bit of moisture. Our retention ponds are drying up. The fish are like, and the turtles, help! It's getting there. So let's see, is anything coming? Not much, because this big, strong high that's sitting out here, and again, that's the key. It's all connected. That's why something could still try to develop down in the Caribbean, because it is a summer-like pattern in the fall, with a very strong and persistent Bermuda high sitting out here. Come on, it's all related, right? It doesn't just chance and happenstance. Anyway, a little bit of progress is made. Looks like a little bit of rain for the southeast parts of the Gulf Coast the weekend coming up, but otherwise a fairly benign pattern, not a lot of Arctic air spilling into the nation. Now we're out at about 8 days. I do want to take it out to day 10. That's a little far, even on the lower 48 GFS here. Details matter, right? But that's a pretty big event right there, big atmospheric river. Look at that. Heavy rain and high elevation, heavy snow. I would love to get out to Tahoe and Truckee again at the front end, like they had last year with hundreds and hundreds of inches of snow. Most of California not in a drought at all right now. That is remarkable, because they had event after event after event like that come in. So I'm going to be watching that. That might be worth a trip to Reno or Vegas, and then drive up and sit out there in Truckee or somewhere and watch the first big snow come down. That'd be pretty cool. Otherwise, between now and the next 10 days, a couple fronts come through. That's about it. Again, no major Arctic air. That's all locked up in Canada for the most part. And typically that's what we would see in an El Niño pattern for November. Later in the winter, as everything changes and we got lots more cold air coming down across the poles sometimes, call that cross-polar flow, that really starts to come into being more in January, February, March. You get sort of a delay, and then once in a while you get a storm that comes in between all that. But the real frequent big winter storm stuff, I'm not even really looking for it until January. But between now and then, you never know. And that's what we'll look at every Monday to see what's coming up the week ahead in lower 48 weather. All right? All right. So yeah, I know it's way too early, but I wanted to at least present exactly what I'd be looking at. I've had conversations with people on direct message on Twitter, our Patreon, our back-end Discord, you name it. We're all talking about this stuff. So why not do it in an open forum here on YouTube and present it to you folks? And again, we can watch this evolve over time. So you bet the very first part of December, we'll look at it. We can compare and contrast. Are things changing? Is it looking okay? It doesn't look as robust or whatever. That's the beauty of this. There is, I guess, accountability, and there's verification. We can just keep watching and see how things go over time. All right? Over time, I'm pretty much over my time. Let's get this online for you, and as always, I do appreciate you tuning in. It's good to be back. Again, it'll be every week, so next Monday, I'll be back again, all right? From all of us at Hurricane Track, I am Mark Sudduth. I'll talk to you again a week from today.